So the first thing we're doing in the lecture is we're educating on decision theory basics. And we're going to take those decision theory basics and apply them to real applicable business scenarios so that when people go out into the world, they know how to act, basically. What was one concept that you thought what stuck out at you? Or to you? Sure, okay. So before we define interdependence, we define what actors and models are. Actors are any decision makers in any business situation whatsoever. So this could be individuals in a contract negotiation. This could be individual companies bidding for a government contract. This is any set of people who are making decisions relative to the model. The model is the piece of business. If it's a contract negotiation, then the model is going to be the contract. If it's an employee-employer relationship, the model is going to be the dynamics and the texture of that relationship. It's players in a game. People who are playing Monopoly are actors in a model. The actors are the players, Monopoly's the model. That's the prerequisite for defining interdependence, because interdependence between actors is the fact that one actor's choice affects the other actor's choice after the first actor's choice. Why is this significant? Well, a conscious awareness of the cause-effect relationship that your action has on the other actors in the model equips you with the information required to make the proper choices and make sure the model iterates. This lecture is an introduction to applied decision theory for business. Great, what's decision theory? Why are you specifying applied? Why is it applicable to business? And the fact that you're calling it an introductory lecture means that there's more to it. That's like 4 or 5 mystery boxes. So then from there, the natural next point is, what is decision theory? Like I talked about in that YAP session, I want the cognitive load to come on and off the listeners. So I want them to learn something new and then hear something familiar. Learn something new, hear something familiar. It's the process of determining expected value to inform which of your available choices is correct given your preferences. Something like that. Decision theory, define it, reference, game theory. So game theory and decision theory are different. Game theory is like a more specific, reduced version of decision theory. Decision theory is more broad and open-ended, and game theory is more defined in the sense that game theory is the study of games, basically. But what is a game? A game could be a number of things. Decision theory is not the study of games, it's the study of decision making. It's cognitive science. Whereas game theory is kind of more economics. It's also, is it anthropology? Decision theory is more cognitive science. However, applied decision theory for business is the process of removing subjectivity for the purposes of defining objective expected utility per decisions in a business context. The reason that's important is because removing subjectivity in business decision making never happens in practice. It happens, the select few who do it are very successful in their careers, but the people who aren't successful, the 99%, are the ones that aren't able to remove subjectivity from their business decision making. So applied decision theory for business is the process of doing that, basically. And I think that's an interesting way of summing it up. I think that'll get the attention of people listening to the lecture. I think that's very interesting because you hear that and you go, shit, am I thinking about stuff the right way? You have no idea, right? And it's a good field of study is like an iceberg, like the iceberg memes. There's like the tip of the iceberg, and then there's the deep stuff. So for me to say that, I think opens up another mystery box. So structure, introduction to the title, or statement of the title, defining decision theory, reference game theory, business. Business, 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 business. What does this have to do with business? What doesn't it have to do with business? So I think then going into business, this is more business operations. So there's business development, there's business operations. I think this paper and this lecture is going to be most directly applicable to business operations rather than business development. It's not how to bring in new models, it's how to keep your existing models. If businesses are fundamentally a collection of interdependent models, then the study of how to correctly engage in those interdependent models is the determining factor of the success of the business. I think something like that. If decision theory is the study of decisions and outcomes, then a conscious awareness of which decisions give you better outcomes is the determining factor in how successful you are in business. You make the wrong choice, you get a lesser payout. You make a better choice, you get a better payout. You do this enough, boom, you're Bill Gates. That's you know what's funny? Bill Gates is like that's an old head reference now, right? Sam Altman's the new cool kid on the block. Bill Gates is like Warren Buffett, who's like John D. Rockefeller at this point. It's like I'm dating myself by referencing Bill Gates. Boom, you're Sam Altman. Whatever. No, for real. Or like that kid from that other startup. What's it called? Cluely? I don't even know what Cluely does. I haven't got a Cluely. Yeah, if you make the right choices, you're successful in business. Let's study which choices are correct, is basically it. It does make the assumption that some choices are better than others. But as I say, relativism is cowardice. So, title, decision theory, business, why this is a thing. Why this is a thing. It actually isn't a thing yet. It will be. Great. Okay. So that's the introductory part in 3 parts. That sets the stage. Then the question, where do we start? If we want to study decisions, and if we want to study decision making, where do we start? Great. Well, we start by defining actors and models, but I think there's something in between. People make decisions, and people make decisions relative to something. What are the people making the decisions, and what are the things that they're making decisions relative to? They're actors, they're making decisions relative to models. Let's define the term. Actors, people. If these are students listening to this lecture, they made the decision to enroll in this college. That's an actor making a choice relative to a model, the model being where they're going to get their formal education. This school being one of the choices they could have made. Defining actors, defining models, that's going to be super simple. And then I think like the first key concept I want to drive home, I'm going to star these concepts. Interdependence. Underline it. What is it? Why it's important? What is it? Why is it important? What's lucky about this is decision theory and game theory are so similar. So combining references to the two, or rather referencing game theory while talking about decision theory is great, because I can say, when you play a game of chess, you move knight to e4, your opponent decides a good counter to that is knight to e5. That's interdependence. What is that? You don't believe in that? That's like the classic opening, e4, e5. Did I say knight? Pawn. When you move pawn to e4 and your opponent goes, the best counter is pawn to e5. That's the concept of interdependence. The move you make, the choice that you make, affects, I don't want to say texture of the model. A decision you make in the model affects what the other actor in the model is incentivized to take in response. No. What do I say in the paper? Interdependence occurs in a model when the decisions of one actor influence other actors in their respective decisions. Chess plays out in a series of moves that continually change the texture of the model for both actors. This is interdependence. In chess, it's how the pieces are arranged on the board. See, I try to define texture, but it reads like I'm defining interdependence that way. But it also is true, I guess. In other models, it's the way each variable or element that makes up the model is arranged. Most models exhibit interdependence as it is the fundamental driving force of incentive structures for decisions. quote, if I make this move, how will my opponent respond? Quote, how does that affect what move I ought to make? If I make this move, how will my opponent respond? How does that affect what move I ought to make? That's interdependence. The fact that the move I make affects what's in their best interest means I should make a move with that in mind. We'll play this back and figure out how to clean that up. Assuming rationality in actors, this could probably be like a passing remark. Like, don't always assume your opponent's rational, because people aren't rational. We make irrational choices. That's why the study of decision theory is so important, because assuming rationality in actors. Don't assume they're completely rational, because they aren't. Actors and models aren't completely rational because we're human beings, right? That's more behavioral psychology. But we're not motivated by fact. This is just psychology. We're not motivated by fact. We're motivated by feeling. And if left unchecked, our ability to make decisions is more of a bottom-up approach of our lizard brain wants to do this, so we justify it. We use logic and reasoning to justify what we want to do, rather than wanting to do what logic and reasoning suggests. The study of decision theory is important because we make irrational choices. If we can do anything about it, we could probably make fewer irrational choices, make more rational choices, and be more prosperous as an effect of that. That's the idea. Problem with traditional economical or psychological frameworks of understanding decision-making is that each description usually assumes complete and total rationality on the part of the actor. That's kind of true. That's true in descriptive economics, which is what a majority of economics is. I think the last set of Nobel Prizes in economics was given to people who said this is why nations fail. It's descriptive. Fundamentally descriptive. You can derive prescriptive measures from it, but it's not fundamentally prescriptive. Where applied decision theory for business lays the groundwork, it gives you the tools to make prescriptive measures for almost anything because it's the fundamentals of decision theory. And of course, later as I build this out, we'll get into more technical stuff. Yeah, understanding expected utility. I'm putting a star on this. Understanding EV. EU. EV. EV. Expected value is the traditional. I'm just going to read what my paper says. Because individual choice creates different states in the model, those choices can be in full furtherance of achieving those goals or less so. I say those goals, I don't define goals. Because individual choice creates different states in the model, those choices can be in full furtherance of achieving a goal or less so. The extent to which a given choice is in furtherance of the desired goal is known as expected utility. Kind of. In probability and statistics, there's a determined formula for determining expected utility. It's usually in the context of whether or not to make a bet, a gamble, where there's a cost of like placing a bet. The bet has some amount of probability that is known, and the payout. It's the relationship to the cost and the payout and the probability of payout. You apply the formula, you get a definitive expected value. The problem is applied decision theory for business is the study of actual things. Like, what situation have you been in where someone says, hey, 50-50 odds on a $12 bet, I'll pay out $30. And you go, okay, sir. Oh, my expected value is, 0.97, I'll take that. Doesn't happen. But what does happen is you hire a Stanford graduate to be your whatever, and you're crossing your fingers he does his job. Like, that's real. So determining your expected value of decisions in real life applicable business management is what we're talking about in terms of expected utility, not the probability and statistics and classical economics version of having this, what is in real life a black box of information determined for you before making the choice, because that isn't the case. And I say here, given these revelations, is it rational to say that if our choices affect outcomes, and some outcomes are better than others, or I say more desirable than others, we can determine the actions needed to realize the most desirable outcomes? and that those actions can be considered correct, as choosing the other ones would result in a worse outcome? What does this say about the relationship between our choices and objective rational reasoning and a ranking of what is good and ought to happen? So, I'm taking numbers in business and teaching moral objectivism. Like, there's a correct choice here. Determining it's a process. The first step in determining is removing your own individual subjectivity. And then you apply the logic and reasoning that we're building out here. The mechanics of zero-sum models, yeah, we're gonna talk about zero-sum models because that's important later. I'm not gonna star it though. Zero-sum models. You can't see that on the camera, right? But I came up with a little graphic, and I like it. I think it demonstrates what a zero-sum model is perfectly. Talking about zero-sum models. The reason I want to talk about it, there's what I want to talk about, and there's what should be talked about. And like at any given point, what I want to talk about relative to zero-sum models is that most people interpret business relationships to be zero-sum when they aren't, or that wealth generation and partnering with people isn't zero-sum, and that if you're making decisions that are optimal in a zero-sum model, what isn't in actuality a zero-sum model, you're making the wrong choice. And it results in the degradation of the model, and you don't get what you could. That's what I want to talk about. I want to talk about objectively acting correct relative to the model, not acting like it's adversarial when it isn't. But that's not a definition of the thing. And if this is an introduction to applied decision theory for business, then defining terms is important, and drawing real-life examples is going to be more valuable to the listeners than talking about what is correct early on. So zero-sum models, what do I say here? Most models, or at least the models that are well known in broader game theory, are zero-sum models, or models that have a clear, distinct winner and loser. In zero-sum models, there are a set of points, things to be obtained by the actors involved, and one actor's gain is the other actor's loss. That's what a zero-sum model is. One actor's gain is the other's loss. Not all models have a clear determinate winner or loser, however. Those models are known as non-zero-sum. Non-zero-sum models are the most common in business, as they're most commonly observable in cooperative settings. But zero-sum are the most common in decision theory frameworks. I should probably say game theory frameworks, because we're looking to separate the two. Zero-sum are the most common in game theory frameworks, since the field studies models with interdependence that fit a traditional mathematic framework. So, like, it's easy to study what is correct in chess. It's deterministic, right? That's why chess computers exist. You can run through all possible options and determine what is correct because of the zero-sum model. The math doesn't work so directly in non-zero-sum models. The term zero-sum refers to total gains achieved by all actors in the model minus total losses suffered by all actors in the model. If the final number is 0, it's a zero-sum model. Chess is an example of a zero-sum model. By the end of the game, there's a winner and a loser. Success states achieved equals 1, and success states lost equals 1. This modeled in numbers looks like 1 plus minus 1 equals 0. We'll explore other examples of zero-sum models here that aren't just games, but real-world examples, and where zero-sum models can be observed in business. For example, imagine 5 founders of a widget factory, widgets here being an abstraction of a product. The 5 founders are deliberating on how much of the widget company's equity to divide amongst themselves. Assuming total equity pool equals 100%, every percentage or amount of shares allocated to one founder is a share not allocated to another. This is another example of a zero-sum model. Total shares gained plus minus shares lost equals 0. Below is a figure to demonstrate what a reduced abstraction of zero-sum models components are. When total losses plus total gains between actors equals 0, you have a zero-sum model. Figure 6 shows a model in which total losses, 100, are added to total gains between all actors, in this case 50 gained by actor 1 and 50 gained by actor 2, totaling 0. Referencing zero-sum models, saying, all right, let's talk about the mechanics of zero-sum models. Giving a concise definition, giving a real-world example, and then giving the listeners a way to apply. They have like a lens, right? They have logic and reasoning they can apply to see if a model is zero-sum. Right? The Bible says test the spirits. I want to give them the tools to test the spirits of the model to see if it's zero-sum. So I like the founders deliberating on splitting equity of a company example, because we use that later to showcase how acting in your individual best interest relative to the dominant strategy of a prisoner's dilemma is not the dominant strategy of real life. Because if a founder of a widget factory goes, I need 100%, and they don't move, they're going to lose everything, and they don't have a model to iterate on. So I like using widget factory founders as an example here after defining what a zero-sum model is. When talking about zero-sum in economics and finance, they talk about cutting up pieces of a pizza or a pie or something. I don't want to do that. I don't want the people listening to me to start thinking about pizza. I want them to think about business. How to determine if something's a zero-sum model. If someone's getting something from you, if you and the other actors are competing for something that goes all the way to the top abstraction of the model, then it is zero-sum. If you and a colleague are competing for a promotion, that doesn't go all the way to the top of the model, because the entire model's incentive structure is such that success is shared between team members. So while you might be competing for a promotion in the immediate, in the micro, you guys are still in a cooperative model in the macro. It's zero-sum if that goes all the way to the top. And that's true for business-to-business commerce. If you're trading money for a service, it's not zero-sum. You're not losing the money in the sense that 1 plus minus 1 equals 0. You're paying the money and gaining a service. Total losses are not added to total gains to equal 0. You're gaining something different from what you're giving. Which is important because a lot of people, when figuring out how to make decisions and when calculating expected utility in more of a nebulous, non-linear, non-combinatorial way, they go, I paid $200,000 for this year's subscription to ChatGPT or whatever the fuck. That money's a sunk cost, but what you received was the value of using that service. It's non-zero sum in that way, and vice versa. If you give a service and get money, it's strange. People are happy to give services and receive money. They're not happy to give money and receive services. That disparity, that lack of equivalency is very interesting. That highlights the lack of direct rationale in decision-making and conceptualizations of business. People think that what they get paid to do was worth what they got paid to do. People paying to receive something always say that what they received was not worth what they paid. Help me square that round. 2 examples of true zero-sum scenarios in business where acting in your immediate best interest is correct. I think I opened the door to that a little too early. I'm like, hey, look, sometimes acting in your immediate best interest isn't correct. And I'm like, no, you're not ready for that yet. Contractor companies bidding for a government contract and 2 competing companies trying to obtain market share. That's it. The market share example is probably where I'll go. I'll probably just say, what's a zero-sum game? You and your competitor are competing for market share. What? What is that? Is that a hand raise? What are you doing? Nice. So zero-sum, what's a zero-sum model? You and your competitor are competing for market share because if your competitor gets a customer, that customer's not going to you. They win. You lost. Well, because in a symmetric model where you have all available information, you can assume 100% rationality to determine what your opponent's next move is. When you're working in an asymmetric model with hidden information, you have to make a determination of what they're likely to have and what they're likely to do. You're operating with a black box. Magic the Gathering, if I know what my opponent's hand is, I can make a move that opens them up to misplay if I think that their chances of misplaying are high.
Or if they know that you know what's in your hand, they can make
an
80% rational move to
That's true.
And then you get mad because it's still really supposed to do
I knew that you knew that I knew that you knew that I knew this. Therefore, yeah, that's a thing in game theory. But I think discussing the mechanics of symmetric and asymmetric models, that line would go nowhere in the lecture.
Yeah.
I would reference it. It'd be like, okay, thanks, pal. Would it never get referenced again? I don't think. We'll see. Understanding the mechanics of non-cooperative and cooperative models, I'm going to star this. This is incredibly important. And you see my 3 graphics there.
I can see that.
Yeah, right. Cooperative, non-cooperative. What do I say here? The key determining factor for a cooperative model, I just started right off the bat. We're not doing that in the lecture. Understanding the mechanics of non-cooperative and cooperative models. Maybe I'll say understanding the mechanics of cooperative and non-cooperative models. What's a cooperative model? Pretty much. When we're holding hands and singing Kumbaya, we're all doing the same thing. We all have the same goal, which is to finish singing Kumbaya, and we're all doing that together. And I'm not stopping you from singing Kumbaya, and you're not stopping me from singing Kumbaya. And when the song's done, we all have had done that. Non-cooperative is when I want to be better at you than singing Kumbaya. I want everyone to hear me singing Kumbaya, and I don't want them to hear you singing Kumbaya. So what do? I muzzle you while I try to sing louder. That's non-cooperative, and you do that to me. That's funny that you said that. Well, the 3 graphics I have here, the first graphic, what?
That's a cognitive break. If you are to make an argument like that.
I like that. No, seriously. And those cognitive breaks during the lecture are what's going to be important. So the 3 graphics I have here, the first is a super abstracted demonstration of a model. It's an actor with a green line towards a goal, representing that the person has a goal and they're taking actions in full furtherance of that. The second graphic is one of a non-cooperative model. It's 2 actors. There's 1 goal. There's a green line to the actions that actor A are taking, and then a green line from there to the goal, and same for actor B. But then there are red lines from actor B to actor A's action, and vice versa, representing that a non-cooperative model can be understood to be 2 people who have a goal, a zero-sum goal, and they take actions in one of 2 categories, either in furtherance of their goal individually, or in an attempt to stop the other actor from achieving that goal. And then, of course, a cooperative model, I have 3 actors. They all share an end goal, and they all take actions relative to achieving the goal together, and they don't stop each other. So I guess in the lecture, I'll define cooperative models. I want to show all 3 of those graphics. I might show the first graphic earlier. Yeah, so let's try that. If I were to draw the first graphic, I would go, this is an actor. Yeah. This is an arrow. Probably not. This is an actor. This is their goal. This represents them taking actions relative to that goal. If this is a sales rep, their goal is to get sales for the business. The actions they're taking is dialing out to leads. What? Yeah, this is a demo reel, so we can figure out whatever after. Sunlight, it's out of ink, almost. So next, I would want to talk about non-cooperative models. Or should I do cooperative first? I kind of want to do cooperative first. So cooperative looks like this. Actor 1, actor 2, actor 3, 1, 2, 3. This represents the choices they're making, the decisions they're making. And then they all share goal to the power of 1, 2, 3. And they all make decisions relative to their shared goal. This is rather than a non-cooperative model. Actor 1. Now this goal is not shared. This isn't goal 1, 2, 3. This is just goal. Actor 1's making choices in furtherance of the goal. Actor 2's making choices in furtherance of the goal. But they're also making choices to disrupt each other's progression towards the goal. That's the difference between cooperative and non-cooperative models. I don't know if this is a good representation because I cooked this shit up in Canva. What do you think? This is an abstraction of what the texture of the model is. Right, actor 1 can do two things. They can either progress their individual interest or stop the other actor from progressing towards their individual interest because their goal is shared in the model zero-sum. That's what non-cooperative is by definition. Because that red line represents a rational move to make. This would be irrational if the model was cooperative. So actor A wins if they achieve the goal. Actor A loses if actor B achieves the goal. So they want to stop actor B from achieving the goal because they lose if that happens. They win if they get it first. So the two choices they make, think of it as it's Connect 4. Connect 4 is a non-cooperative model. You're either trying to line up your pieces or you're trying to block your opponent. Yeah. And then what would be a cooperative game? If Connect 4 is a non-cooperative game, then, I don't know, Minecraft is a cooperative game, assuming PvP's off. Or what's the one that Nick plays? Oh, Nick will probably see this. Hello, Nick. We Frank Abagnaled our way into a lecture hall at, where are we?
University of Texas at Austin.
Oh, so this is UT.
Yes.
I thought we went to a different school.
No.
Oh, this is the business school at UT. Okay.
It's one of the business schools.
Got, there's more? Wow. So, yeah, so Nick plays Dead by Daylight a lot, or not a lot, but that's his guilty pleasure. And I've never played it, I don't know anything about it, but I think it's a cooperative game. Most of these people, if they're students, will have never done anything in business. Most of these people they haven't cut their teeth in business. But they've played video games, so I like the idea. But my point is, if these students are going to be on the younger side, I kind of want to start with a game reference and then talk about a real life example after so that they make the connection to something they're familiar with something conceptual that they might not be familiar with. If I'm lecturing to a private institution, it's probably, I'm talking about product developers in a team, or a team of developers developing a product, or, I don't know, a couple insurance adjusters on the same claim, whatever. We can figure that out later. But the structure, I guess we're going to go from the introduction to interdependence, to understanding expected value, to zero-sum models, to defining cooperative and non-cooperative models. And then the last part of the first third is decision theory in business, choose a vendor. Yeah, no, I really like this because this is a crash course on market data. This is a crash course on customer experience. This is a crash course on financial accounting. This is a crash course on partnership decision theory, you could call it. I'm going to read it verbatim and see what happens. Now that we understand decision theory to be the analysis of choice in a model for best possible gain, how is this applicable to business? Let's analyze an example where you, a business owner, need to select a vendor to produce your product. Here is the context in which you need to make your choice. You sell your product to your market where you own 12% market share. You're looking to acquire 2 to 5% more market share this year. You account 30% of your operating expenses to be for the wholesale acquisition of this product from your vendor. Your target customer profile tends to be above average on brand loyalty, preferring to stick with the same brand when incentivized to, according to your market data. Your customer values long-term sustainability, they're above average on household income, and your product is considered more of a lifestyle brand than a required necessity. Given these data points, which of the following vendors is correct to do business with? We've got vendor 1, 2, and 3. The first vendor is high on affordability. That means it doesn't cost you a lot. They're lower on the quality side, which means user experience is going to be on the lower end. But they're above average on efficiency, meaning they'll spin their product out quick. Vendor 2 is low on affordability, means it costs you a lot. It's higher on quality, meaning the customer experience is going to be higher than average. But it takes them a while to produce. And then vendor 3, middle of the road on all of those. in this example, affordability measures, blah, 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 yep. Given these three options and the configuration of goals we've outlined, which of these three vendors is the correct choice? This is great. I think this is gold for the lecture. This is like, I'm going to double star this because this, choose a vendor. This does everything the lecture wants to do. It wants to engage. It wants to engage the people listening in that it gives them something to think about. And this allows me to go like show of hands, right? You know, freshman Jimmy raises his hand and he goes, I would choose vendor 1, Professor Salce. And I get to go, oh, is that the correct one? No. And I'd go, bad, Timmy. Guess what? You lose market share on vendor 1 because people stop buying your product. Dumbass. And then, you know, Sarah goes, I would choose vendor 2, Mr. Salce. Very good, Sarah. You know, you gain market share off that because of the data points. I'm being a little silly right now. But the reason I think this is so important for this lecture is because it offers that kind of like, I think we choose vendor this, and this is why. And someone might give a wrong answer. What would I do? I would give the context of the model, and I'd open it up to questions. And maybe a guy raises his hand and goes, I would choose vendor 1 because they're most affordable. It's like, okay. You know, you're thinking like a capitalist. You want the cheapest option, and they're the quickest. They're highest in efficiency and highest in affordability. So you don't mind sacrificing quality for a quick, affordable option. And I would probably say something like, that's fine if your individual product margin is where your head's at. If that's what you want to optimize for, then great, choose vendor 1. But that's not what we outlined. We said we want to gain market share. And our customer data says that they are incentivized to be repeat customers with the brand. They value brand loyalty, and they value quality. So they want to stick with the same person that offers the highest quality product. They're above average on income, so they don't mind spending a little bit more. And you're a lifestyle choice, so they're going to spend a little bit more. You know, given those points, and I'll refine how I engage. I think this is the most important point of the lecture. And this should be wrapping up the first third. At this point, I droned on about some like nebulous decision theory shit, but at this point, they're like, oh, fuck. Choices are right and wrong. I got to pay attention. And then from there, I can introduce the prisoner's dilemma, the iterative prisoner's dilemma, and then talk about the bigger picture philosophy stuff. Maybe. Because again, this is supposed to be introductory to decision theory in business. So then I go, you know, vendor 2 is correct because of what we outlined earlier. Why is vendor 2 correct? Well, so and so. If you choose vendor 2, you'll have the best quality product, but it will cost you significantly more time and money. Vendor 3 offers a middle-of-the-road option, offering average values on each. But what are the downsides to these choices? How will the market respond to a product that is delivered quickly and affordably, but is lower than average quality? That's a key question. How will the market respond to a product that is this, given what we know? That's a business class. That's a 23 lecture course right there. And we're running it down in hopefully a 15-minute segment. I say if you selected vendor 1, it's likely that you'll lose market share over time, but have better margins in the short term due to high affordability and turnover. As your customers buy your product, they have poor experiences due to its lack of quality and purchase your competitor's alternative. Again, because what we determined their customer profile to be. This compounds and you lose market share year after year. You gain more immediate revenue, but you don't get repeat customers. If you selected vendor 2, it's likely that you gain market share over time, but have lower margins in the short term due to the increase in cost and decrease in timely delivery. However, your high quality of product delivered means repeat customers from exceptional user experience, which, assuming objectively better than your competitor, will compound and result in gaining market share as time progresses. If you selected vendor 3, you're choosing to have an average quality product on all fronts, your baseline affordable, baseline on quality, and baseline on efficiency. You're likely to make decent margins on your sales and maintain your market share, but you're not likely to grow as the other option in the markets are choosing to sacrifice high margins to ensure exceptional quality, and the customer segments that are willing to pay more for high quality aren't choosing your product. What I want to highlight in talking about these things, and I want to get better at talking about this absent the screen. I want to be able to just talk about the 3-vendor option, articulate the points to be taken away, and have represented it at the start correctly. But the takeaway is, from this example, we're able to identify that in real business, what is theory optimized is highly dependent on the context of the goals. So I guess somewhere in the structure, we're going to have to introduce the concept of theory optimized choices. I think we're going to do that between EV and zero-sum models. Theory optimized. Okay. From this example, we're able to identify that in real business, what is theory optimized is highly dependent on the context of the goals. That's the case. Which vendor is correct is determined by the fact you're looking to gain market share as the primary goal. If you were looking to generate quick maximized margin with no concern over sustained market share, then vendor 1 would be your best choice. If you were looking to establish a baseline predictable cash flowing business that reliably serves the center of a normal distribution of your market, vendor 3 would offer you that solution. Remember to apply the following questions in your decision making. What context does this choice exist in? What goal am I trying to achieve? How does this choice iterate over time? That's important. Does how this choice iterates over time reasonably progress towards that goal? So now that we've introduced the fundamental concepts of an introduction to decision theory, let's look at a model where these understandings can be applied. That's when I bring in the prisoner's dilemma. So what we just did is we talked about the first third of this lecture. That was kind of a long time. I did do a lot of yapping. Okay, so we just covered the first third, which is an introduction to decision theory. What we actually did just there in our first third was a shitty introduction to decision theory, but it gave us a structure to start with. So at this point in the lecture, if I'm taking this paper as primary inspiration, which I probably am, an abstracted example of a basic model would start off the second third. And at this point in the lecture, we've talked about basic decision theory concepts. So we've introduced decision theory as the study of decisions. We've defined some key terms: actors, models, expected utility, zero sum, cooperate, non-cooperate. And then we said, that's decision theory, here's how it's applicable to business. And we gave the example of choosing a vendor. That's the first third. So at this point, I say, now it's time to explore an abstracted model. I've written in the paper the simplest abstraction of a model that offers us a better understanding of the concepts of payoffs, interdependence, and how actors and models make decisions is a classic prisoner's dilemma. This model was designed by mathematicians Merrill Ford and Melvin Drescher in 1950 as a part of their work at Rand Corporation. It has served as a definitive demonstration of introductory decision theory ever since. The prisoner's dilemma is typically represented as formulated by Ford and Drescher originally, with the actors in the model as prisoners given a choice between two options to reduce their respective prison sentences. However, the hyperspecificity of this specific model is completely unnecessary and even reduces the digestibility of the core concepts required for a complete conceptualization of the broader applicable heuristics for informed decision making. In actuality, the prisoner's dilemma can be any model with interdependence between two actors who each can choose to cooperate or defect for a difference in reward. That is what I want to talk about. So the prisoner's dilemma represents that two actors can choose one of two things. Depending on what they choose, they can make a more selfish decision or a more selfless decision. And they're hoping the other side does the same. I want to introduce it well. I want to introduce it in a non-contrived way, i.e. actors with interdependence in a model that have two choices whose results, and that interdependence holds a lot of weight here. because the fact that interdependence exists affects the outcome. Because they have two choices, but they have four payouts. And this is where I'd introduce the concept of a payoff matrix. We talked about decision theory fundamentals. We talked about what it is. We defined some stuff. We talked about applied decision theory for business. We gave an example. We did an exercise. So now I go, what am I saying? I'm saying there's a model that already exists that perfectly demonstrates key decision theory concepts. And that's the prisoner's dilemma. Okay, so the start of the second third is, let's talk about an abstraction of a model to play around with the mechanics of these concepts. And what I put on the board is a version of the prisoner's dilemma. And I want to include the fact that thinking about prisoners in an interrogation room is bad because it detracts from the actual takeaways and the actual formulation of the heuristics that are supposed to be understood by the people here. And instead, what I want to focus on is that the prisoner's dilemma represents a model in which two people make a choice asymmetric. We didn't talk about asymmetry. They make a choice relative to each other. They don't know the choices they're going to make. And whether or not one's bad, the prisoner's dilemma is using numbers to represent a situation in which one person can screw another, and the other person's powerless to stop it. That's a great representation. That's a tool for understanding decision theory in business, because that's a situation that can actively and frequently does happen in business. You, as actor one in the model, have two choices. You can either defect or cooperate. The reason you would want to cooperate is because you hope that the guy on the other side is nice. And if he is, you guys both get a decent payout. That's the thing about the prisoner's dilemma, is these represent prison sentences. These represent negative things. It's like reduction of your problem is how traditional economists talk about the prisoner's dilemma. That doesn't fit in a traditional business sense. If this is business school, we're not talking about reduced prison sentences. We're talking about payoffs, payouts, positives, things that go this way, not things that go this way. Trying to get something that goes down doesn't make a whole lot of sense. This is me talking to you. This is not going to be, maybe it will be, but probably not. So you, as actor one, want a payout. You want to get something from the situation. You're partnering with someone, basically. You could be an asshole and defect, because if they're a nice guy, you get 5. You get the biggest possible payout. You win. What? I'm going to call it anthropology, and I might be using the wrong word. Entomology? What's entomology? Etymology? I'm going to call it nature game theory. In nature game theory, people talk about hawks and doves. If you're a dove and you meet a hawk, you die. If you're a hawk and you meet a hawk, you guys fight. 2 doves take off. It's the prisoner's dilemma. If you aim for the best possible shared good and the other person doesn't, you get screwed. Why is this useful? It's Plato. It's conceptual, abstracted Plato. We get to mold it and do things with it to derive objective truth, because we're unable to do that independent of the abstracted Plato. We get to play with this. This gives us the tools to make prescriptive measures for real business relationships. I'm not satisfied with my representation of the prisoner's dilemma. What did I write? I wrote, the prisoner's dilemma is typically represented as formulated by Ford and Drescher originally, with the actors in the model as prisoners given a choice between 2 options to reduce their respective prison sentences. However, the hyperspecificity of this specific model is completely unnecessary and even reduces the digestibility of the core concepts required for a complete conceptualization of the broader, applicable heuristics for informed decision-making. In actuality, the prisoner's dilemma can be any model with interdependence between 2 actors who each can choose to cooperate or defect for a difference in reward. The model has the following outcomes for each, depending on their choices. The best possible outcome for the individual, the worst possible outcome for the individual, a result slightly better than the worst possible outcome for the individual, and a mutual reward for each actor slightly worse than the best possible outcome. That last part of it's like best for the individual, worst for the individual, and then one slightly worse than the best and one slightly better than the worst. That's the prisoner's dilemma. 0 being the worst possible reward for the individual, 5 being the best. When we have a breakdown of a reward structure between interdependent actors and we need to conceptualize it in an organized manner, it's kind of clunky in spoken English, we can arrange those payoffs by choice and by actor in what's known as a payoff matrix. So I think I want to take the prisoner's dilemma, describe it, and I want to introduce the concept of a payoff matrix with it. I don't think I would be giving a good decision theory lecture if I don't introduce the idea of a payoff matrix. In traditional lectures, I've never seen a payoff matrix separated from the prisoner's dilemma. I've never seen someone use it in something other than that. And that's my problem. I don't want to perpetuate the tying of the two. I want the concept of a payoff matrix to be taught independent of a prisoner's dilemma. Maybe what I can do is I can talk about the prisoner's dilemma, and I could write it out, and I can go, I'm going to write it out in a payoff matrix. This is a payoff matrix. You use it to organize payoffs per decisions per actor. Done. Continue on the prisoner's dilemma. This is educational copy on the prisoner's dilemma, talking about why it's named that. I say here, imagine you're participating in a model like the prisoner's dilemma as actor 1. You have no pre-existing knowledge of actor 2's choice, and you're both engaging in an asymmetric model. The key question is it better to choose to cooperate or defect? This is good. The reason I'm introducing the prisoner's dilemma here is because that introduces the concept of a dominant strategy, which is a key concept. I'm going to star that. I don't put it in the paper, but I should put it here. I'm going to star introduce the concept of dominant strategy. In the lectures I've listened to, they give a much too technical definition. They say their traditional definition of dominant strategy is like, if the payout to you is the same regardless of what the other guy does, that's the dominant strategy. That's the traditional definition. I want to simplify it, and I want to say the dominant strategy is what you should do. And have that be the definition, not the other way around where you should do it because this is the definition. Because that's like a 3-point definition. I want a 2-point definition. Dominant strategy is what you should do. Here's the methodology of determining it, and we borrow from the traditional definition. In order to determine whether to cooperate or defect, i.e., in this lecture, it'd be like to determine the dominant strategy of the prisoner's dilemma. So we've talked about decision theory, talked about how it's applicable to business, and now we're exploring the conceptualization of choices in a model. And we're doing that for 2 reasons. 1, because later we're going to talk about how iteration affects decision making. And 2, this allows us to explore the concept of dominant strategy. Dominant strategy is like the concept. Like this is like a 3-star concept. It's the only 3-star concept in applied decision theory because everything about this field of study will always be determining what choice you should make. Dominant strategy is the thing you should do. Well, I don't know if I'm confirming myself out of ignorance. I don't know if there's something I don't know in the field of decision theory and game theory that I just haven't been exposed to. What you're doing is reasoning from first principles, which is what I'm doing here, but I'm saying there might be something in the field of game theory that I haven't been exposed to that separates the concept of what you should do from the concept of dominant strategy. The way discrete games are not the same as discrete numbers in mathematics versus game theory. We'll see. I'm gonna reason from first principles, and I'm gonna talk about what I can. We're gonna play it back, and we're gonna do research accordingly. So what I've done here is I've established a game. The success state of this lecture is if we as a collective determine how to win the game. And that's the second round of participation. That's the second nugget that they get to walk out of the lecture with. By the time the lecture is done so far, they will have determined a vendor, and they would have gotten a crash course on that. And by the time this is done, they will have played a game against an imaginary opponent as a collective, and we will have gone through the exercise of winning the game. There's an exercise in which someone's given an amount of money, and they present to the other person how much money they want to give them out of the amount of money they were given, and if the other person says no, no one gets anything. So for me, let's say the professor gives me $100. You and I are students, and I go, I'll give you $1. If you say no, no one gets anything. If you say yes, I get the 99, you get the $1. That exercise was to determine what the equilibrium point is. Where do people say no? Where do people say yes? And what it found is if the difference in money received from the, we'll call it principal, equals the difference between distributors, the secondary person would say yes most of the time. So it was like 66-33. It wasn't 50-50 is the point. If I get 100 and I say 50 to you, I could have taken more. It was like, maybe it was 60-40. The person who was given the money got more. The person who got the smaller amount was okay with that as long as the differential was the same, I think is one way to chop that up. Anyway, to your point, you want me to split the class in 50, you want them to play Prisoner's Dilemmas? Maybe I would call two people up and they would write down cooperative defect on a piece of paper. We'd show it. Maybe? I mean, what you and I are talking about is like a classic college lecture. And what you and I are building here is something given as a service. It's on camera. We can put it on the board. But participation in a prisoner's dilemma is required even if it's just individual in the heads of people. So what I would probably do is I would pose the game and I would ask them what they would do. And someone would raise their hand. I'd go, what would you do? And they'd say, I'd cooperate. And I'd go, why? And he would say something like, because I hope that the other side would cooperate too. It's like, okay. I call on one person, they go, I would defect. It's like, okay, why? And he goes, because that has the biggest possible payout. And I go, well, but if your opponent also says that, then you guys both get a shitty payout. So if you guys are both acting in your individual best interests, you guys both get something pretty shitty. And then maybe I'll do it again. Someone raises and they go, then I would choose to cooperate because I would hope the opponent does the same. And I go, okay, great. Well, you know, if they don't, you get nothing. It's this one. You get nothing. That's where the dilemma comes in. Because at this point, without running the math on what the dominant strategy is, everyone's like, fuck, well, he's right. I don't really know. This is a head scratcher. If I cooperate, I could get screwed. But if I try to screw them, and they try to screw me, well, we both kind of suck. Right? Like this, if you're a humanitarian, this is great. Right? You guys are both happy, you're both getting the same payout, no one feels screwed. But if you're a hawk, you're like, I want to get the 5, I want him to have 0, I want to get out of there with my 5. Fine. So what do? Let's figure it out. I talk about the fact that in the prisoner's dilemma, you're only playing once, blah, blah, blah. Anyone who's going to be listening to this rough draft lecture has read the paper and can read the paper. And I think what I want to do is I want to sit down with the paper and contrast them at a later date. I want to admit something. My math here was off the dome. So what I wrote was me figuring out how to determine dominant strategy. I think it's the way everyone's done it. That's I'm talking to the future me. I want to cross-reference that. I want to see if the way that I did the math is actually correct as other people have done the math, and if I'm not either leaving anything out or hallucinating anything. So I say to model out here, let's look at the outcome of running 2 separate instances of 10 different prisoners' dilemmas. So we're going to do this times 10 We're going to do this to get a data set to determine what dominant strategy is. We want to see how these things play out if we make different choices. What do I say here? To model it out, let's look at the outcome of running 2 separate instances of 10 different prisoner's dilemma models, where we only cooperate on one and we only defect on the other. Let's assume a 50-50 chance on what the response from each of the other actors is to get closer to an average of running a larger number of these models. Basically, I'm saying, like, if you run one, you get like a 1-point data set. This is like a data science kind of deal. If we ran 1,000,000, we would have as close to a 50-50 as possible. Let's not run 1,000,000 and instead just cut to the result of getting 50-50 off of 10. And then I think from here on the lecture, I would put the results on the board. So only defecting versus only cooperating, 0. At this point, I want everyone listening to the lecture understanding what we're doing and why we're doing it, not just going through the motions. How do I represent what we're doing? We're averaging possible payouts to analyze predictable results based on decisions we could make to determine which gives us the best payout on average. Why? Dominant strategy is determinate here based on payout on average for a reason. There's logic and reasoning in math that can be put into explicit words, and I'm struggling to figure out what a perfect sentence of that would be. It would be something like, because the problem is, one sucks. You don't want 1. You want to avoid getting 1 and 0 and 3, ideally, and you would want to get 5. So why is this correct even though possible results are 1? How would I articulate this? It's the concept of determining what is correct. Are you following me? I can stay in my zone here. It's the process of determining what is correct given the restrictions of the model, and that's a concept we return to. Given the restrictions, what is correct? How do we determine it? I know how to determine it. I just don't know how to talk about why that is how to determine it. We don't know what the other person's going to do. That's not perfect information. Maybe I have to talk about perfect information. That's kind of the asymmetry thing. What the other side is going to do could be anything. Because what we're talking about here is a one-off. And the problem is, I want to make sure I explicitly talk about the fact that what we're talking about is a one-off prisoner's dilemma, but we're drawing from a sample size of 10. Because that can be kind of confusing. We're playing it 10 times? I thought we were only playing it once. We are only playing it once, but we're simulating the results of a perfect 50-50 split upon 10 iterations to determine dominant strategy. And it's why that's correct is what I'm struggling to articulate. Because I can't just do it. I despise academic lectures that just do the thing without talking about how and why they're doing it. Because then there's no educational value. What we're going to get could be either cooperating or defecting on the other side. The result that gives us the highest possible outcome on average, regardless of what we get on the other side, is how you determine dominant strategy. So we need to figure out what nets us the best on average, regardless of the uncontrollable factor. That's the basis of determining dominant strategy. And to do it for the prisoner's dilemma, we have to simulate a sample size of possible results for either of our two strategies. And we're arbitrarily choosing 10 because that lets us go 50-50. And it gives us a sample size to do addition and averaging with.
This tells me that the dominant strategy is in the defense.
That's correct. It's absolutely correct. But you understand how that is. Did you not read the paper?
I did. I'm telling you where I'm at right now on the lecture.
Correct. Well, because it's true. The dominant strategy for the prisoner's dilemma is to always defect. Outside of this lecture. Like, that's how it's been since 1950. So, we're going to total these up. Why are we totaling them up? Because we want to average them. We want to determine an average value. That's what we're doing. We're determining average expected utility per choice. What are we doing? We're determining expected utility per choice. We're hedging against uncertainty by determining it on average. So now that we've got a total of 30 and 15, I'm just going to write what I wrote. Read what I wrote. Fucking lecturing for hours on end ain't easy. This shows us that the average expected utility of defecting is higher by a factor of 2. The reason I wrote it that way is because it doesn't matter our sample size. If it's a perfect 50-50 split, it could be 10, it could be 2. What did I say, by a factor? Does that mean something different? I don't think it does. It might. By a factor of 2. Both. Really? I didn't go to school. This shows us that the average expected utility of defecting is higher by a multiple of 2. Thus, defecting in this game is in our best interest. And again, like I was saying, the reason I said that is because the sample size doesn't matter. This could be 100, this could be 2. As long as it's a perfect 50-50, it's going to be higher by a multiple of 2. This is a crucial point in understanding the decision theory optimized approach to business that we'll explore throughout this paper. First, let's ask ourselves, what is the highest possible set of points to be gained over 10 iterations of the prisoner's dilemma? Okay, this is interesting because we're dividing to get a percentage. So before I ask that question, I want to set the stage for that. What is the highest possible set of points for each strategy? The highest value in the payoff matrix is 5, times 10 gives us 50. 100 games would be 500, 1,000 would be 5,000, so on. Since 50 is the highest possible aggregate points, so we can think of this as like a performance score. If we had perfect performance, if we got the highest possible payout on every single iteration, we'd have 50. But because we can't determine what actor 2 does, and we're solving for 50% likelihood on each choice, 30 over 50, 15 out of 50 for always cooperating. We can calculate a percentage of maximum payout from the average of the results of our 2 strategies on a per action basis. I'm using a sample size of 10 here with a perfect 50-50 result set to shortcut a perfectly balanced sample size. Because our maximum payout over 10 games is 50, and on average we'll achieve an end result of 30 by choosing to always defect, and an end result of 15 by choosing to always cooperate, we can calculate a 30 over 50 result, or 60%, and a 15 over 50 result, or 30%. So we're at 60% expected value for always defecting, and we're at 30 expected utility for always cooperating. So we're getting 60% of our possible pie versus 30% of our possible pie, on average, the more of these games we play. A predictable 60% expected utility from a single one-choice decision tree approach is an attractive proposition, especially when the alternative strategy yields half as much. That one sentence has like a book behind it on cognitive load, concentration of complexity in decision tree versus yield. That's an example of a highly technical decision theory paper. And that's more in the cognitive science aspect. That's something that I really want to explore, because purposefully reducing the size of your decision tree and sacrificing ceiling of payout to simplify the choices you can make, but yielding a less than possible result, is oftentimes the correct choice. And that's a white paper. I don't know if the white paper exists, but that's something that's very interesting to me. And that comes out in this one sentence: a predictable 60% expected utility from a single choice decision tree approach is an attractive proposition, especially when the alternative strategy yields half as much. I want to talk about this for a minute first, while I have it in the front of mind. Search costs. This guy won a Nobel Prize on search costs. And I talked about this as applied to my time at Vandenberg House. We spent all of our time looking for someone. There's a point in like best possible candidate at a 10, worst possible candidate at a 1. This is over time. There comes a point where cost of continuing to search makes choosing something less valuable. So 3 months into a hiring process, I should pick the better than average candidate rather than continuing to spend more time searching for better candidates. It's a beautiful piece of cognitive science and decision theory. It's beautiful. It's elegant. It's applicable to so many things. It's an example of the type of work that I hope whatever this is yields. So, really quick, I'm saying this to future self. Explore the idea of reducing your decision tree, even though it sacrifices payoff ceilings. Okay. But how does this math work and why? What about these interdependent non-cooperative models allows for a set of conditions that links choice to payout? And why is understanding how these models work important? Aren't these mechanics strictly exclusive to this one obscure game with no connection to broader real-world utility that can actually result in an increase of real spendable economic surplus? That's the question. To answer these questions, let's explore how incentive structures change when we introduce iteratability to the prisoner's dilemma. That's like the thing that blows this whole thing wide open, is the fact that when you're playing it once with someone you don't know, you'll never see again, and you have no business with, fuck them. Like literally the math says fuck them. But luckily for us, that doesn't exist. It's not real. You're never going to come across that. What you will come across is the fact that every relationship in your life is an iterative prisoner's dilemma, where people interpret your actions relative to them as either cooperating or defecting, and because of interdependence, they act accordingly in response. And what you get out of that iterative model is dependent on what they choose to do. And they are incentivized to either cooperate or defect against you, depending on how you behave relative to them. That is like, once you understand that consciously, and you bring that to the front of your mind, you have control over your relationship, not in a manipulative way, not in a Machiavellian way, but you understand that choices you make result in actual outcomes. How I want to represent that, I'll figure out later. So that sets the stage of the question, that poses the question. Well, first I want to introduce the iterative prisoner's dilemma. I want to get the class familiar with what the iterative prisoner's dilemma is, and then it ties back to the rest of what we're talking about after. So then I go, hey, guess what? Every relationship in your life, and especially in business, is an iterative prisoner's dilemma. Great. Once that idea is introduced, then we bring in the concepts that we've talked about before, which is like, okay, then what's the dominant strategy in that case? Because the dominant strategy before was to fuck them. Screw them. Give me my 5, get out of here with your 0. That's what's in my best interest. I don't care. Does that stay true? How should I best act? If all of my employees or employers or business partners or vendors or advertising partners or anything in business are iterative prisoner's dilemmas, how should I act? That's a great question, because if you act correctly, it shows up on your bottom line. You get to pay your bills. You get to be business. You get to be Mr. Big Business if you do it correctly. And if you don't do it correctly, you end up like Elizabeth Holmes. Is that an old reference yet? Is that still relevant? You don't know about Elizabeth Holmes? The blood drawing lady? Andrew Adeletta was working on that tech before she went to jail. I remember Andrew Adaletta talking to me about it. Like, whoa. And then Elizabeth Holmes goes to jail for fraud. Theranos was a company that wanted to track people's health through the way their blood dries. Apparently, your blood will dry in different configurations based on diseases you have. So if you have one disease, it'll dry in this pattern. And those patterns were deterministic and could be tracked and logged. And Elizabeth Holmes was working on a company that wanted to sell machines that did that as a product. So she got investors, and apparently she did some fucked up shit. She lied about a bunch of stuff. She misdiagnosed people on purpose because she was incentivized to do so for investor money. Apparently there was a bunch of lying and fraud. They made a movie about it, I think. But she did not act in a theory-optimized way relative to her iterative models. Lying to an investor whose money is determinate, whose investment in your business is determinate on being informed, lying to them, giving them false information, would be defecting in your model. I don't know if we're going to be talking about how and why. Maybe. I have a lot of different ideas on how this lecture could play out from here. One thing I do want to do is introduce the iterative prisoner's dilemma. So on the second half, I have introduced the concept of dominant strategy, then determine dominant strategy of the prisoner's dilemma, talk about how and why come to the conclusion that defecting is dominant. And I think the iterative prisoner's dilemma will still be in the second third. What are the key takeaways of the iterative prisoner's dilemma? So, prisoner's dilemma. First thing I would do is define it. What is the iterative prisoner's dilemma? Well, it's playing the prisoner's dilemma, except after you play a first round, you play a second round with the same opponent, you play a third, you play a fourth, everyone remembers what the last move was made. Your opponent remembers what you did last round, you remember what your opponent did last round. That's what it is. Why do we give a shit? There's the bigger picture of why we give a shit, which is that all of our relationships are iterative prisoner's dilemmas. Then there's the immediate why we give a shit in the context of this lecture in this moment, because the fact that our relationships are these comes later. So I'm like, hey guys, remember, we just did the prisoner's dilemma a few minutes ago? Well, some people came up with that in 1950 for whatever reason, and in 1980, 30 years later, some guy said, let's do it multiple times. Why do we care in this moment? Maybe we don't say why. Maybe it's kind of ambiguous why we give a shit for a while I talk about it. That goes so hard. AppliedDecisionTheory.com goes so hard. Okay. So we determined dominant strategy in the prisoner's dilemma. We went through how to determine it. Done deal. Wax seal on that. Done deal, wax seal. I'm going to use that. That's what it was, because I was like, who gives a shit about the prisoner's dilemma? Because you'll never be in a situation where you're playing split or steal with someone who you don't know and will never see again. It's exceedingly rare. What isn't rare, what do I want to do right now? I do want to say, who gives a shit about the prisoner's dilemma? You'll never be in that situation. Boom. In 1980, a guy named Robert Axelrod conducted an experiment. He got a bunch of people together, and he said, what if we played the prisoner's dilemma over and over again against the same person we remembered what they did last? Well, he rounded up 14 of his colleagues, and they wrote computer code as iterative prisoner's dilemma strategies. They didn't play themselves. They wrote strategy in the form of code and had those pieces of code play against each other in a round robin tournament. Every time I hear round robin, I think of a burger. Red Robin. Yum. Robert Axelrod got this round robin tournament together, and him and 14 other people wrote code, and that code competed. I'll figure out how to clean up that sentence, or even if it's. So I think it is. I like the idea of establishing precedent where I'm not just crackpotting about choice. I'm like, yeah, in 1950 they came up with this, and in 1980 Robert Axelrod did this, and in 2025 MarcAnthony Salce did this. So Axelrod came up with this experiment. He wanted to see what a winning strategy for an iterative prisoner's dilemma would look like based on the success state of total points accrued over the round robin tournament. That's an important piece to establish before going on about this. In his 23-page paper, Effective Choice in the Prisoner's Dilemma, Axelrod outlines the 14 different strategies his fellow participants brought to his tournament to determine which has the best outcome. He implemented a 15th random strategy that made random decisions as a control, which ended up performing the poorest. This random strategy and its poor performance offers insight that the further from conscious awareness we have in our actions, the farther our results degenerate. That's me right there. That's like my thinking. That's an idea that I'm positing. Hate that word. In this is that like the fact that the random strategy performed the poorest literally shows us that the further from consciousness we are, the worse off we are, which supports this idea that there's correct choice to be made, and we can determine correct choice and then make it for a better result. He models the outcomes of having each strategy run 200 rounds against each other strategy and rank them based on total aggregate points to determine a winner. We'll review the winning strategy and explore why it was the winner of the iterative prisoner's dilemma, blah, blah, blah. The winning strategy was named tit for tat. Why did this strategy win? What was its logic? I can skip this because I can just talk about what its logic was. That's determinate. I don't have to figure that out. What I do want to talk about is how iteration affects decision making. That's one of the gold nuggets in this lecture, is the fact that you're iterating in your game should affect how you perceive decision making. But the good part of that is you can do things to incentivize further iteration of the model. Jordan Peterson references this occasionally in passing. But the only thing he'll ever do is say like, if you're a 2-year-old and the other 2-year-old doesn't play nice, you don't want to play with him anymore. That's what he says. It's like, well, yeah, Jordan, it's true. Well, you got to play nice. But what I'm talking about is the fact that it's mathematically true. Jordan Peterson can say it. And he can say, like, yeah, you gotta incentivize the other side to play with you. Like, sure. Or we can show how the numbers prove it. I think that's cooler. How iteration affects decision making. I want to sum up this. I want to sum this up in a couple sentences. We can't deterministically figure out, when I say deterministically, I mean like probability equals 1, determined, 100%. What any other person relative to our models, any other actor in any of our models, we cannot determine what they're going to do with probability equaling 1. What we can do is figure out what they're most likely to do by inferring what they're incentivized to do. So that's like step 1 is logging in that piece of logic, right? Like, that's there. We log, we can say they're likely to do what they're incentivized to do. Second is our relationships are iterative prisoner's dilemmas in which we defect or cooperate relative to the expectations and what the other person gets. So if we put a defection on the board and our other person doesn't get what they could, and they're aware of this, they log that as a defection, and they can respond in kind. The third part is we know what the dominant strategy for an iterative prisoner's dilemma is, and we can model that out. That's number 3. Dom strat. Number 4 is that tells us how we should act. If I defect against you, I'm literally, according to the math, incentivizing you to defect against me. And because you've defected against me, I'm now incentivized to defect against you. And if we're acting in our individual best interest, that iterates forever. Now, what does a model that iterates in mutual defections yield? It yields 1 per iteration. The payoff from each of us is we're only getting 1 when we could have gotten 5. You can understand this to be -4. I'm brainstorming here. What we want to have is iterative cooperations, which is netting 3. So for every defection, I guess, we're losing 2. Because what we want to be incentivizing is cooperation. How do we do that? We cooperate. Even when a defection is put on the board, there's 2 schools of thought. So tit for tat defected in response. Tit for tat always started with cooperation because it wanted to incentivize mutual cooperation. It would never defect first. So if the other side was always cooperating, great. Iterative cooperation across time. If it got defected against, it would defect in response to disincentivize further defections. Why? Because from there, if it's a mutual defect loop, tit for tat has effectively shut off all potential gain on the defecting side. Because other strategies in this experiment were like, oh, if I defect and they cooperate, I get a large payout. So tit for tat says, I'm shutting down that strategy. I will always defect if you defect, but I'll always cooperate if you cooperate. But it was forgiving in the sense that if after being punished with a defection, the other side had decided to cooperate again, great, it would cooperate in kind, and you could reestablish a continuously cooperating model. That's significant because at any point of sustained cooperation, you have maximized potential possible gain. You are literally receiving what is highest possible aggregate points accomplished. Upon defecting, you're receiving, if I say the least possible, it's literally incorrect because 0 is on the board. But given the restrictions of the model and the incentive structures, if you're acting rationally, the smallest amount you could possibly receive is 1. Because if you're acting irrationally, you're not defecting and cooperating as you should, and occasionally a 0 will show up. Yeah, which is significant, which is one of the significant takeaways, because the prisoner's dilemma is structured in a sense where cooperation yields more. I don't want to say than the sum of its parts. Total pi equals 5 if we're playing me against you. Total pi equals 6 if we're saying the 2 of us together. A significant insight of the iterative prisoner's dilemma is the fact that cooperating yields 6 total points distributed, whereas defecting is total points distributed equals 5 or 2. Yes, if you cooperate. Yes. Yeah, that's the point of the paper is the learning curve is like, it's like a bell curve. It's dumb person goes, I should act selflessly. Middle of the bell curve goes, no, I'm gonna act in my best interest. And then the galaxy brain is like, I'm gonna act selflessly because that's also selfishly. The learning curve is, I want the best for myself. Therefore, I'll screw the other side. And then when you reach enlightenment, you go, I want the best for myself, so I'll act in their best interest. That's the paper. And the metanoia that this offers is that we change our way of thinking from how do I take the other side's pie to, and what can I give him in exchange for his pizza so that next week he wants to do it again? That's what it is. Snake oil salesman can say, how do I put lipstick on a pig so that he gives me his pizza today and I stick him with a lipstick pig? Right. That's what marketers and used car salesmen say. How do I get the 5 on the prisoner's dilemma? How do I convince him to say I'll cooperate and then I say I defect without him knowing I get the 5, he gets the 0, he's on his way? That's what unsophisticated business people do. Sophisticated business people go, how do I self-sacrifice? How do I deny myself so that the other side of the table will want to play again tomorrow? And we do this forever. We each get a 3. I'm never tempted with trying for a 5. And what I get to do is I get to lock in this iterative model that generates value for me predictably and consistently so that I can go out and get more of these values, more of these models. The last third, I think that's 2.
This is what you described as the main.
Okay, yeah. So second third is the prisoner's dilemma and the iterative prisoner's dilemma. 3 out of 3. Time horizons and individual best interest. All right, so starting the third of the lecture, decision theory optimized business is what this section is called. Decision theory optimized business is introducing the concept that given what we've established, that's such a thing, that decision theory optimized business is something that's knowable. You know why this is so important? That's what you and I saw. We watched half of that movie about the card counter, and he was playing poker. The best poker players are the ones who can do decision theory optimized poker. And business is exactly the same. If you master decision theory optimized business, which is something that I intend to materialize, you will be acting correctly in every decision you make. And that compounds over time where you get the best possible reward you could have possibly received over the course of your business life. That's it. That's what we're doing here. That's decision theory optimized business. And we can derive what decision theory optimized business is by exploring what we've been exploring. Basic decision theory concepts, an abstracted model, the logic and reasoning applied to determining the correct strategy, and emergent concepts that make themselves known as we explore these things. You materialize them, you've studied them, you understand them. That informs your decision making in actual real business. That shows up on the bottom line. What I've talked about here is time horizons and individual best interest. More sophisticated business actors tend to have a conscious, working understanding of a broader time horizon than just the immediate iteration of the model. Time horizon here referring to the amount of time that is to pass that a person chooses to bring to conscious mind. So if you're making a choice to maximize your immediate gain, you have a smaller time horizon. You're thinking about the next 30 seconds. If you choose to forego your immediate gain, your immediate maximization of gain, because you want to see a benefit in the future, you have a larger time horizon, like 6 months, a year, etc. Great example of this is Mark Lowry on Jet.com, sacrificing immediate margin to gain market share. He had a broader time horizon. This understanding of broader time horizon on the part of the more sophisticated business actors is emergent in their behavior and thus their realized business outcomes. Because they understand business partnerships are fundamentally an iterative prisoner's dilemma, and that incentivizing a continued, consistent, and predictable equilibrium of cooperation is how long-term, sustainable wealth is built for themselves and those around them. That's a key concept in this lecture. More sophisticated business actors understand a broader time horizon. The barrier to entry for achieving this cooperative equilibrium is the occasional choosing to cooperate when you could defect. Another way of understanding this is the barrier to entry to generating wealth is allowing the other actor in your model to win against you with somewhat regularity in order to incentivize continued iteration. I use the language win against you as a concession to how we as individuals tend to conceptualize business relationships. However, a deeper understanding of what willingly allowing the other side of a relationship to gain does to the overall iterability of the model is gained through careful examination of the truths outlined here. This barrier to entry is one many so-called businessmen will find too difficult to breach. I encourage those of you reading this to think objectively as to whether you are allowing other actors in your models to win on occasion by choosing to cooperate, or if you're attempting to maximize personal, individual, immediate gain through each iteration by defecting against them. We can see the fundamental laws of interpersonal relationships reflected in objective mathematical models, like the results of Axelrod's experiment. And we can make determinations on how we ought to act as a result. A real-world example of the conclusions we can draw would be the fact that stealing an apple from a supermarket may be in your immediate best interest, as it maximizes gain and minimizes immediate cost, but iterate that approach over time, and you'll eventually pariah yourself out of that society completely, losing all future potential for gain. It's best to just pay for the apple, even when you don't want to. I've been paraphrasing a lot of this paper. Like, I wonder what would happen if I read it word for word. I'll have to do that sometime. Achieving and maintaining equilibriums. Okay, so the third part of this is introduction of the concept of time horizons and best interest. And I basically say, look, guys, your time horizon's more than you're probably thinking about. And I'm going to star the following: achieving and maintaining equilibriums. The point at which both actors are incentivized to continue to cooperate is an equilibrium. It's a Nash equilibrium developed by John Nash is when each player is incentivized to continue behaving how they're behaving. We're taking that and we're expanding on it a little bit, and we're saying we want to achieve equilibriums where in every single round, over time, everyone's putting checks on the board or cooperations. We want to achieve this, and we want to maintain it or sustain it, whatever word I'll use. We want this to iterate into the future forever, if possible. We want to make sure we're making the choices that do that, and we're not making the choices that destroy that. Because if we put X's on the board, then we incentivize the other person to also put X's on the board. And if there are too many X's on the board, you lose the whole thing. And you lose more. You don't just lose this, you lose this. You lose everything the model could have been in the future iterated over time. Correct, right. But you lose the opportunity cost of it being all checks. And because of search costs, it's difficult to find and maintain those equilibriums to begin with. So when you start a model like this, what? Ah, man. Oh, I thought they were at the door. Maybe they'll leave us alone. Maybe, let's see. I'm good. After a brief entanglement, after negotiations with Mexican Parliament, we've reached an accord. Where was I? Also, can you confirm that this is still working?
The light's still on.
Representing that the microphone is okay. Where was I? Achieving and maintaining equilibrium. Search costs. I don't want to incorporate that work into this introductory lecture, but that's key. The fact that even the opportunity to start one of these is worth something. To have it and to not put checks on the board says it makes the bet that that's not worth anything, when that's not true. And we see that through the work of whoever it is did the work on search costs, that having one to engage in is worth a lot. And most of the time, it's worth sacrificing the couple points. I want to be able to make that argument without contradicting tit for tat. Because tit for tat says, if you defect, I'm going to defect. I'm going to defect into oblivion until you cooperate for the purposes of incentivizing cooperation. Because the nature of the success state determined a winner based on total points accrued over time, not on total opponents defeated. So I want to be able to represent that having a model to begin with is worth something, so it's worth cooperating although there's a defection. And maybe that's represented in the fact that if the other side cooperates, you cooperate too, you don't double defect. That could be represented there. I'll revisit that. But the point is, the star is achieving and maintaining equilibriums. Achieving and maintaining equilibriums is a key part of theory-optimized business. You want to get one of these, you want to be engaging in one of these, and you want to make sure that you reach an equilibrium where both people continue to cooperate. Sloppily mismanaging them, either through commission or omission, results in them degenerating, eventually irreparable destruction and inability to sustain and gain more of them. And when you're unable to put more of these on the board, you don't have a business. Literally, business is literally the process of gaining these and sustaining these. There is not a single business on the face of the planet that is not gaining and maintaining these equilibriums, these iterative prisoner's dilemmas. If you're selling software, defecting means you don't get customer renewal. If you're selling cars, defection in the process means maybe you don't sell the car or you definitely don't sell the second one. I'll figure out what else goes here. But this part on the last third is talking about achieving and maintaining equilibriums. I'll draw from the paper later. I have this graphic. Now this is management. This is business management. This is product management. This is people management. I don't even know if they teach this in management. Management school is a thing. I think it's the Eisenberg School of Management. That's in Massachusetts. I don't know if this is taught. It should be. You have two developers, Dev 1, Dev 2. You're a manager. You're employed by the C-suite to manage a team of developers to develop and launch a product. That's your responsibility. You have a dev. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are two separate realities. In reality 1, with Dev 1, you treat them well. You promote them in a manner that is commensurate with their achievements. You give them the resources they need in a timely way. You express patience with them when they have questions. You don't allow a fictitious version of their performance to taint how you engage with them. And what do? They show up to work on time every day. They fulfill their tasks as written every day. They're incentivized to work beyond the minimum because they like you as a manager every day. They report to you in a timely fashion and give you 100% perfect information every day. And by the time the model is done, they've completed their product. They've completed their piece of software. They've delivered it to you. You get to launch it. You get to deliver that to the C-suite. In the other reality, in Dev 2, they do great for a little while. You onboard them after spending an extensive amount of time hiring. You give them the tasks. They do the tasks. But guess what? You as the manager allow underhanded office politics to play a key role in your company culture. You don't compliment them or promote them commensurate with their achievements, despite them being deserving of it. And it's all around shitty work culture. Guess what? They leave on month 4. They take their work product with them. You don't just lose a developer in the sense that now you have to fill their place. You lose all of their potential progress first. You also lose all of the progress that was made retroactively, and you have lost all of the effort it took to onboard them after the hiring process. Not only that, you lose on a second dimension because now you have to replace them. You have to replace them with Dev 3 at this point in the timeline. So let's say it takes, 2 months to onboard a new developer, a month of hiring, a month of candidate, 2 weeks of candidate screening, and then 2 weeks of onboarding. Great. At the time in which developer 1 has completed their process and is continuing to iterate on that model, you have now hired from scratch dev number 3, who's at square one. This square is not even checked off yet. Best possible scenario is that you learn from your mistakes, and after 6 months of treating dev 3 correctly, they'll complete their product. Best case scenario. Worst case, or rather the more realistic case, is that you're the same manager you were with dev 2. 4 months of fucking around? Great. They quit because the company down the street has better culture. They're not getting defected against on the other company. They're getting defected against in your company. And this cycle repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats. Employee retention is shit. The product never comes out. Why does this happen? Because the manager doesn't understand that their relationship is an iterative prisoner's dilemma. And they think by the letter of the law, this is how I should treat the people I manage. I told the developer not to bother me while I'm having my lunch. They came in with a question. I said, don't ask me right now. I'm having my sandwich. You're bothering me. Go away. The developer goes to his desk, feels like an asshole, feels like he's bothering his manager, feels like shit. Doesn't do that again. Bad. I'll have to come up with better examples than being bothered while eating lunch. That's the importance of maintaining equilibriums. Example. Levels of sophistication and cost-benefit analysis. I think I talked about the example of a homeowner who hired a contractor to build a deck. The contractor built the deck. The homeowner didn't pay him. Levels of sophistication and cost-benefit analysis say that unsophisticated cost-benefit analysis says, I don't have to pay you, you already built my deck. What am I going to pay you for? My deck's built. And they act that way in all their models. Managers can act that way too. What do I need to give you a promotion for? You're just doing your job. What do I need to compliment you for? You're just doing your job. What do I have to signal to you that you're doing a good job? You're doing what I already paid you. I pay you to sit and code. Your break was 10 minutes more than you're allowed. I'm writing you up for that. Bad dog. The letter of the law of your employment says this. The problem is you can't iterate on that. That contractor, what is the contractor incentivized to do from that position? The contractor is incentivized to continuously defect in response. So that's what they're likely to do. We can't determine what they're going to do. We can determine what they're likely to do and say that that's most probable. And they're probable to defect. Well, how can the contractor defect? Use your imagination. Any number of ways. They can tear the deck down, sure. They're certainly not going to work for you again because they're going to get the same experience. They can also tell their other contractor friends, don't work for this guy. Great, now your ability to establish equilibriums is completely reduced because you didn't want to fork over what you agreed to fork over. Now, unsophisticated business actors will want to defect and in a bottom-up approach construct logic and reasoning as to why they should, but the source is a desire to defect for personal gain. They'll say, I shouldn't pay you what I agreed to pay you. The deck quality is less than sufficient. That may be so. And you may be able to play that card with the contractor and say, you did this incorrectly, I asked for this. I asked for mahogany, you gave me cedar, whatever. I shouldn't have to pay you. You could probably get away with it a few times. It's certainly not a recipe for sustained, productive business activity, because your ability to construct and maintain equilibriums degrades with every person you screw for that immediate gain. And the math shows that when you destroy models that way, you lose all potential gain that you could have gained if the model iterates, which is most of the time more than what you received in the immediate. And you can play that out and find it to be true. I have some questions here. We can ask ourselves, what does my network of willing participants look like over the course of a full year of choosing to defect, or 10 years of choosing to defect whenever given the opportunity? What does my network of willing participants look like over the course of a year, and even 10 years, of choosing to cooperate? And at the end of the accumulation cycle, I use that term for like a year or 10 years accumulating models. At the end of the accumulation cycle, does the total potential upside of having a larger network of iterative models outweigh the cost of choosing to cooperate when I could have gained more through defecting? If the contractor built the deck, and I said I'd pay him 20 grand for it, and I could get away with haggling and get it for 10, what's worth more? The ability to iterate with that contractor over the course of an indefinite period of time, or that $10,000? Most of the time, it's the ability to iterate. Because if I screw him for the 10 grand, he's not going to be very happy, and he's going to do something adverse in response. I'd much rather him want to work with me in the future. I say, in your life, go forth and cooperate despite the temptation to immediately gain for yourself at the cost of your fellow actor and your models, as doing so grants you and others the maximum amount of prosperity possible. It's true, because as we see in the iterative prisoner's dilemma, cooperating gets you 3 points each forever. The total aggregate points is the highest when you both cooperate. There's another example of what it looks like when the model doesn't happen. Here's the ideal. That's what we want to see. We want to see that with everything. We want employees to show up on time. We want managers. The next part is parsing, cooperation, and defection, and then I close it. So I'll close it here. The final part of the lecture, the final part should be 2 parts. It should start, the final piece of the lecture is how to parse and understand the concepts of